That storm yesterday Monday knocked out a lot of internet and electricity all across the area. So the 6 counties, some counties were hit worse than other counties were. So depending on where people live, they got issues getting in. Hey, Trayvon, I see you. I see you're here. So that could be a reason why I don't see half of the class here. But maybe they'll get in before we're finished for the day. All right. Are y'all doing all right? You can hear me, yes, I think, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, Michael, yeah, exactly. Jaylyn just showed up. I got Jaylyn. Jaylyn, I see that you're here. Yeah, I had cleaned my yard up on Sunday, and it was beautiful. And then Monday, when the sun came out, when it was finally over, oh my gosh, more work to do in the yard. That's just part of life. All right. The best laid plans of mice and men oft times go astray. Yes. It never ends, yeah. So we are today working on psychopathology this week. I should be able to finish it on Monday. I'm guessing Monday, but it is out there and it is in the lectures and it is transcribed both and recorded both. So we don't have anything to do except a quiz this week, and for the rest of the time we have quizzes and we also have tests, but you have the one essay that's left, and that is the global essay that you have to do. If you click here on the screen, it will take you to the global essay requirements and the place where you can submit your global essay when you're finished with it. Right? That's this link right here. I will show you also the pathology section that I talked about. This is the class, right? All of the different sections we've talked about. We only have 2 sections left, therapy and social psychology, besides the psychopathology we're talking about today. And I've started each one of the lectures with a song that has to do with that lecture, and this one is Everybody Hurts by REM. I actually went to school with REM at the University of Georgia. That's where they were formed, and the B-52s also. It was lots of fun in those days. That was the time to go to school. Some of you probably don't even know who REM and the B-52s are. That's just sad. But the class has the audio recorded files of the transcribed lectures, and there are 5 of them. Each one has its own little section. Otis Redding, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, is a good psychological mental health issue song. And then Gnarls Barkley, Crazy, if you've ever heard that song. The 4th one, The Addams Family, I think that's a great one for differences. I don't think there was really something mentally unstable about them. They got along in society. They actually did function in society, so it's not a pathology, but weird people. And then the last one, the last song is Johnny Cash. One of his last songs that he recorded was Hurt. And I was actually in a movie with Johnny Cash, and he's a really nice man. I was sad when he passed away. But in the 4th one, I have a movie that you can watch a video on what is narcissism. But I also have in there something about what we call body dysmorphic disorder or body dysmorphic syndrome. And one of the causes of body dysmorphic syndrome is that we look, first of all, we're not happy with how we look. Nobody is really happy with how they look unless they're narcissistic. We have all kinds of imperfections that we wish were not there. But some people take it to extremes, and unfortunately, they are looking at the advertising and marketing industry pictures of people who are supposedly perfect because they wouldn't be in the magazine cover if they weren't perfect. and yet that person on the cover is not the true person. They've been modified, and this is a very good video to show that reasoning behind the body dysmorphic syndrome for some people. I'm going to play it here. I'm going to just give it a few seconds to make sure you guys can hear it. That's great, Sarah. I think the phone is a great way to join in so you can hear it, and the computer so you can see it better, but just use the phone for your sound. That's fine with me. And so I'm going to play this for just a few seconds, and I'm going to stop it and make sure you guys can hear it and see it. Right?
Growing up, I was kind of always self-conscious, like wanting to look a certain way.
It's a never-ending battle.
And you look at yourself and you know you can never attain that ideal.
So can you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So here we go.
As I've gotten older, you see different changes.
I feel like I have some wrinkles around my eyes.
I'm never going to be skinny. I'm not a skinny girl.
It can be hard when you see models and celebrities and like you just don't look the same.
Wow.
Oh my God.
I did not expect it to look like that at all.
I feel like it doesn't even look like me.
I think because I know myself, this looks really different. Why would you want to make someone look so different?
I like my freckles. I think they add character, and the fact that they're gone, I don't even know who that is.
Just as a normal person, seeing yourself change and your identity changed, it's pretty shocking.
Once someone else has done your makeup and someone else has done your hair and someone's directed the way your body looks and then taken away your imperfections, then there's not much left of who you really are. This is how I always wanted to see myself, but now that I see it, I'm like questioning why I ever wanted to look like that.
You look at these ads in magazines, you see these women who look absolutely flawless, and you're like, I wish I could look like that, but who really looks like this?
I think we live in a really interesting time where we feel like we have to make people look to the standard that's not attainable for anybody.
Instead of looking at other things and trying to aspire to be something else, we should just be comfortable in who we are and just try to be our best selves.
I think something that everybody should keep in mind is that it's natural to be critical of yourself. It's natural to be uncomfortable or awkward, but you just have to know that the ideal just doesn't exist.
The ideal does not exist. So go ahead and eat McDonald's. Some of the worst ad placement
Growing
I've ever
up,
seen. It was just terrible ad placement. So the ideal does not exist. It's a created computer simulation of a person. And it is whose definition of what is beautiful? You know, I think I've told you all before. I agree with Sir Mix-a-Lot. I like big butt and I cannot lie. So whose definition of beauty was just created by Photoshop? And you are yourself. Be happy in your own skin. And it's hard to do. We all like to be, you know, on the other side of the fence. It's always greener on the other side of the fence. The problem is if you get caught in that ideal, the other side of the fence is better. Once you get on the other side of the fence, guess what? It's the side of the fence you're on, and the other side looks better. So it really doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. You're always going to be looking at the other side and wanting what's on the other side. So this is an issue that happens with women and men, both. It's not just a woman's issue. Women tend to want to look skinnier, and they go into bulimia and anorexia because of it, if it becomes a pathology. And we'll talk about both of those. And then on the man's side, men want to look bigger, stronger, healthier, till they do something that is completely outrageous to their bodies. And this man can't even wipe his own ass. His muscles are in the way. It's not even muscles. They're injections that they put into their body to make their body expand and look like muscles, and it changes their muscles into into a more fibrous. Tendons are destroyed by this chemical. They're doing damage, so much so that in some cases they explode. Their muscles just explode. That's just not good. That doesn't fit the need of their world. But here's the really interesting aspect of this. They want to look more muscular, and they go on stage and they get applause from society. And so society is a part of their mental health issue, because they're getting applause for doing the thing that's causing them harm. So you have to define what pathology really is, and that's what we're going to do in this section. So let's go to the actual PowerPoint for this, and I'm going to have to change the PowerPoint back to the first slide. We got to slide 26 in the last class, so let's see where we can go in this one, right? All right, did anybody else come in while I was? No. All right, so here we go, psychopathology. In history, we could see that from archaeological evidence that early cultures in prehistory attributed mental health disorders to supernatural powers, possessions, witchcraft, voodoo, right? Have you seen the meme on Facebook recently? The wife yells down to her husband, "Honey, does it feel like sometimes to you that somebody is that your back is hurting really badly?" He says, "No, it doesn't. How about now?" She's sticking a voodoo doll, right? That's from being together 24 hours a day for the last 2 weeks. So the Greek physician, the very first well-known physician who's set modern medical practices, was Hippocrates. And he determined that mental health disorders were caused by biology, not by witchcraft or voodoo dolls or other supernatural causes. And because it's biology, we can control it. So he studied that, and some of his followers studied the mental health issues associated with biological conditions and other factors. But the church, and we're talking about early Catholic Church, the church turned back time and declared that mental health was specifically the soul. And mental health disorders were signs of demons and witchcraft and other types of possessions, and it was the domain of the church, the priests, the bishops, the cardinals, the pope, who were allowed then to study this because it was the domain of the soul, not biology. And so if you were not a priest or something else in the church and you were trying to study this material, you were excommunicated or worse. So it took a while, but as we saw in the very first chapter of these lectures, eventually the Reformation came about, and the people that came in place of the Catholic Church had no real issue with studying the mental health conditions, and so we continued on with Hippocrates' ideas. The recent studies of Salem, Massachusetts, where the Salem witch trials occurred, suggests that the Salem witch trials were actually caused by psychedelic mushrooms, that the mushrooms were growing in the buildings where they kept the bread, and so some of the bread had psychedelic mushrooms, sort of like taking LSD when you eat these mushrooms. So they were in the bread, and the people who ate those particular pieces of bread that had the mushrooms in them went nuts, and it looked like they were possessed by demons and witchcraft, and that's what caused, they think, the Salem witch trials. It was psychedelic mushrooms, a biological cause, not a not mental health condition caused by possession or voodoo dolls. Now, we do have spirits in our world, according to African tribes. The African tribes believe in sorcery. Haiti, the people in Haiti believe in voodoo. The Thais believe in spirits. And if you are a person who believes in the Judeo-Christian Bible, it talks about spirits. So you have to believe in spirits. But we don't believe that spirits cause your mental health issues anymore. We know Hippocrates was correct, that it is something to do with your brain, it's something to do with your social situations, it is something to do with the way you've been taught. So science has taught us that mental health disorders are an illness caused by biology and other factors, and Hippocrates was correct. So let's define then what psychopathology is. It is a pattern. That's an important word, pattern. It means that it happens over and over and over again. It isn't something that happens just once and then there's no reason why, it just disappears and then comes back again at some unpredictable time. It's not a pattern of behavior, just something that happens every once in a while. So a pattern of emotions, behaviors, or thoughts that are inappropriate to the situation and leading to personal distress and or the inability to achieve important goals in your life. So by this definition, a woman outside without a burqa on in Saudi Arabia is showing a psychopathology. She will be arrested. It is the society's requirement that women wear burqas. So if she can't conform to her society, then she has a mental health issue. Unless she's doing it on purpose because she has civil disobedience in mind and knows that she's going to be placed in jail, but she's doing it to protest against the burqa. That's a different story. She knows she's in control, and the person who has a pathology is not in control. They don't do what they're supposed to do because they can't do what they're supposed to do. Hallucinations can be, but are not necessarily, a sign of mental health disorders, because hallucinations can have other causes like drugs, taking drugs, or sensory deprivation, as we talked about in another chapter. The 1980 movie Altered States, with William Hurt as the actor, showed a sensory deprivation tank which causes hallucinations, because the sensory deprivation tank takes all of your senses away from your brain. Your brain has no more input, and it does not like that, so it creates its own input, and you hallucinate. Delusions are extreme disorders of thinking involving persistent false beliefs. Delusions are the hallmark of paranoid disorders, which we will talk about. And affect, I'm sorry about this again, but we've gone through this before. Affect means mood or emotion. So affect, mood, and emotion are the same thing. Just like this is a finger, but it's also a phalange. So there are lots of words that mean the same thing. I'm not trying to confuse you. This is just the way it is. We have disorders called affective disorders, which simply mean mood or emotion disorders. The medical model takes a disease view, while psychology sees mental disorders as an interaction of biology, cognitive factors, your thought processes, social and other factors. 15.4% of the population suffers from some form of mental health problem at any given time. And just because you have a mental health disorder does not mean that you don't have another mental health disorder. In many cases, people have multiple different disorders together. So it's not just one disorder many times. 32%, more than twice, the population of people who have mental health disorders will have a symptom of a mental health disorder at some point. But that does not mean that you have a mental health disorder. It just means that you have a symptom of a mental health disorder, and we'll talk about the difference in just a minute. Can you all still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, good. The medical model, as I said, is one side of mental health and the way to look at it, and it is psychiatrists. Psychiatrists look at mental health as the medical model. They look at all mental health issues as something like a disease that has an objective cause and then requires a very specific treatment based on that cause. It is the doctor knows best approach that leaves the patient as a passive participant. The doctor tells you what to do and you do it. Imagine you go to a new restaurant and you sit down at this brand new restaurant and you're waiting for the server to come over. And the server comes over and says to you, "Hi, how hungry are you?" And, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, yeah. Well, I'm a 7 and my date is an 8. Okay, the server says, "You allergic to anything?" "No, I'm not allergic to anything." "Okay," says the server, and goes off and comes back with a meal for a 7 and a meal for an 8. That's not the way we want to deal with our servers and our restaurants. That is the medical model. The medical model says, how you feeling? Do you feel this way? Do you feel that way? Okay, this is what you're going to do to fix that. The psychological model, on the other hand, takes a cognitive approach to mental health. There's a reason for it other than just biological. It is psychogenic. It's caused by psychological factors. Patients, which we call clients in the psychological model, clients are actively involved in helping themselves recover, like being in a restaurant and the server comes over and gives you a menu. You look through the menu. This looks good. You talk to the server. Is it something that you've had before? Is it really good? How much is it? How small? Yes, 7 and 8 are important of my hunger levels, but I want to know other things about it too. Do other people like this? Are there other people that enjoy it? What's the most what is the thing that everybody seems to be buying? Are there specials today? There's a whole host of things that you will talk to the server about and get their information from you and you their information from them, and you make the decision together as to what it is that you're going to do to fix your hunger issue. That's the psychological model rather than the medical model. So there are clinicians who believe that there are over 300 different pathologies, and we're not going to talk about all those pathologies. We'll talk about a very select few that I find interesting, and I hope that you will find them interesting as well. So just prior to 1800, a man named Mesmer showed that he could transfix a patient by waving something in front of their face and talking in a specific cadence at a specific level, and he could transfix the patient, the person. He did this as a show, but it was kind of interesting to medical doctors as well. And today, we use this word. We say somebody is mesmerized by something, and this is where that word comes from this man Mesmer, who showed he could transfix people. And if you become really interested in something, oh my gosh, you are mesmerized by it. We call it hypnotism today, what he did. So Mesmer's work later influenced a young French physician, Jean-Martin Charcot, who used hypnotism and studied it extensively in a scientific setting. So he looked at it to see if it could help his patients or not. And he was especially interested in patients that we call hysterical patients. Today we don't call them that. We'll talk about hysterical patients in this lecture. one of Charcot's students in the winter of 1885 to 86 was a young physician, Sigmund Freud. And it was work with hypnotism with Jean-Martin Charcot that showed Freud there was something that was hidden inside the mind that influenced behavior. And later, with another medical doctor that he was working with, Dr. Joseph Brauer, he witnessed a patient named Anna O, whose actual name was Pepperdine. Her last name was Pepperdine, and what was called the talking cure. And this gave him his final clue of what he called repressed memories. Anna O would not drink water. She had a number of other issues as well, but she would not drink water. Well, neither would W.C. Fields, who was a comedic actor back in my day, who was a child. W.C. Fields was an alcoholic, and people said, why don't you just drink water? He said, no, fish piss in water. So that was his excuse for being an alcoholic. But Anna, she had no real reason, no why as to why she would not drink water. And one day during one of her chimney sweeping self-hypnosis type of talking cures that she and Brauer worked out together, she remembered an event from younger time in her life where she was at a party and there was a person that was sitting in a low chair to the ground who was drinking water from a glass and put the water on the ground next to him and was talking to somebody else and did not notice that a very diseased, mangy dog came out of the woods next to him and drank from his glass and then left. And so he just picked up the glass and drank from it again, and that freaked her out. And from there on, she did not drink water. When she remembered this event and came out of her hypnotic trance and still remembered the event, she could now drink water because she realized that this was an event that she took out of proportion, that she did not logically think about what it meant to have that person drink from that glass, but she can drink from, she can control where she gets her water from. And Freud was like, ding, an event that happens in your past that controls your behavior and you have no memory of it whatsoever, and then remembering it in a later time where you can think about it more logically can change your behavior, and consciously you can now change that behavior. That's repression, and that's where repression came from. Different ways to look at mental health and how it happens is cognitive perspective. Abnormal behaviors are influenced by your thought processes, by mental processes, how people perceive themselves and how they perceive their relationships to others and their place in society. All of that is a cognitive approach to mental health disorders. But there's also the behavioral approach, which we talked about in the learning section, that you can be taught to behave badly. If you are rewarded for bad behavior, then that bad behavior is going to be what you perform. And if you are somehow punished for good behavior, then the good behavior will slowly decrease, extinguish, and what will happen? The only thing left over is bad behavior, and so you will have bad behavior. So abnormal behaviors can be acquired through behavioral learning, through operant conditioning, or classical conditioning. There's also obviously those that have genetic disorders or something happened to their, like fetal alcohol syndrome. Their mothers were drinking while they were developing in the womb, or some other biological process that went wrong. So biopsychology studies the brain and its functions associated with mental health, and genetic factors that are associated, as we talked about, serotonin gene. Having two small serotonin genes can cause more depression than normal. But it's not just those three, it's that it's one or the other one. It's an interactionist approach to mental health. all of these things, biology, behavior, cognition, the environment, all of them combine to produce the mental health issue. So for instance, as an example, a person is predisposed to depression. They have the genetic predisposition for being more depressed than the normal population. They are overworked and stressed. We know that that can cause issues. And their car breaks down, their child gets sick, more stress in their lives. Their thoughts will turn negative. Instead of being positive, they'll start to become pessimistic instead of optimistic. And all of that will lead to depression. So it's an interaction of everything in your environment. And we do, the biopsychology, psychologists do believe in the use of medication, but not the be-all and end-all process. You use medication to help a person to be able to go through therapy. If a person's too anxious or too depressed, then they're not going to be able to think straight. So get them the medication they need to settle them down until they can now go through therapy properly and slowly wean them off of the drug that they were put on. And we also know that there are medical conditions where, it's like schizophrenia, you will never cure schizophrenia with therapy. And so they need to be on some kind of antipsychotic medication. But a schizophrenic can also be depressed. A schizophrenic can also be anxious. And so we can work on that. We can help without drugs. But the psychotic portion of schizophrenia, it's something that's broken in the brain, something that's improperly connected in the brain. And so we need to help them with medication. So if the behaviors or thoughts are statistically rare, they may be considered abnormal, but not necessarily pathological. As I've said in a previous lecture, who's happy all the time? Almost no one. But those people who are happy all the time, that's very unusual, very rare behavior and thought processes, but it's not pathological. And if the behaviors or thoughts deviate from acceptable social norms, standards, and values, they may be considered abnormal, but not necessarily pathological because they don't get in the way of you achieving your goals in life. So I've talked about the Yanomamo of Brazil before. The Yanomamo is a tribe that lives in the jungles of Brazil. They're a protected tribe. You're not supposed to go out to see them or connect with them in any way because they don't have any of the immunities that we have. And smallpox or something else would just wipe out the entire population. So they are protected. There are people who do go to see them, that study them, and we find that they have a religious ceremony where they use a product like cocaine to sniff up their nose to have a religious experience. And they do this often, but they don't just sniff the cocaine up their nose. They have a long pipe with the cocaine in it, or the drug that's in it, and they put it up their nose and they sniff it in while another person blows on the other end so it gets way up into their sinus cavities. And this damages the sinus cavities so that they eventually have mucus that comes out of their nose quite a bit. And they don't have a product called dippity-doo there, but they do have long hair, and so they use their mucus to keep their hair nicely coiffed. Right? In their society, not a problem. In this society, they would never have a job. It's not hygienic. They would rarely, I guess, have any friends. They would not be able to meet the demands of life if they continued to do that particular behavior in our society. So if they can't change to meet society's needs, definitions, then they have a pathology at that point. All right?
It's a walking staph infection.
Yeah, it's a walking staph infection, yes. So we have to define pathologies by the society you live in. If you're in France and you're a woman and you're walking around bare-breasted, no issue. It's okay in their society. In this society, you'd be put in jail over and over again until you are finally unable to meet the demands of life if you did that here in the United States. So each society is different, and that's part of your global essay about the differences between societies and the behaviors that are seen as acceptable in one society and not in another society. So, there. So how do we define the causes of mental health, the ideologies, the factors that define a mental health issue? And here are 6 of them, I think a good group of 6. Distress. Does the individual show unusual or prolonged levels of unease or anxiety? That could be considered a symptom of a mental health disorder. Maladaptiveness. Does the person act in ways that interfere with his or her well-being or the needs of society? That can be a symptom of a mental health disorder. Irrationality. Does the person act or talk in ways that are irrational or incomprehensible to other people? And you'll find that in schizophrenics a lot. The unpredictable behavior. Does the individual behave erratically and inconsistently at different times or from one situation to another, as if experiencing a loss of control? Oh, and back to irrational behavior. When I was a kid, we used to see people that were walking down the street in Philadelphia, in big cities, where they're talking to someone, but there's nobody there. They're all alone, and they're talking to somebody. You moved and gave them a wide berth, right? There's something wrong with that person. Today, they could have a Bluetooth in and be talking on their telephone. You have no idea if it is irrational behavior or if they're talking and it's irrational behavior. So that was kind of a funny aside from my childhood and the differences from one time to another time. Unconventional behavior. Does the person behave in ways that are statistically rare and violate social norms of what is legal or morally accepted or desirable? And finally, observer discomfort. Does the individual behave in such a way as to make those around him or her feel uncomfortable, threatened, or distressed? And this is the definition of a bully. If you know somebody who's a bully, they already have one of the ideologies of a mental health disorder. And you only need 2. If you have 2 of the 6 symptoms present, you can be classified with a mental disorder. So my question is, do you guys have a mental disorder? Let's see. Have you any time in your life when you felt blue for no apparent reason? Distress, for no apparent reason, you just feel bad, right? Distress. I have. Have you ever done something rather than study when you know you should be studying? Every single one of you has to raise your hand on that one. You have definitely done this. Have you ever had an experience in which you thought or saw, you heard something or thought you saw something that wasn't really there? That's irrational. Again, I can hold my hand up for that one. Have you had a flash of temper in which you said something that you later regretted? That's unpredictable behavior. Yeah, almost every one of us has done that, but we apologize afterwards. Hopefully, we're good enough human beings to apologize for having done that. Have you had unusual thoughts that you never told anyone about? Unconventional behavior. And have you distressed someone because of something you said or did? You caused observer discomfort. Now, I can say yes to every one of those, and I'm sure that every one of you can say yes to at least 2 of those. But does that mean you have a pathology? Remember, 32% of the population has a symptom of a pathology, but is not pathological. They just have a symptom. This is just a symptom. It's just something that happens. Every single one of you is okay, because remember, although everyone has experienced at least 2 of the ideologies on the previous page, a psychopathology is a pattern of emotions, behaviors, or thoughts that are inappropriate to the situation, leading to personal distress and or the inability to achieve important goals. I've achieved all of my goals in life, not my wants, but my needs. I've gotten everything I need in life. I am not, living in a mansion with butlers and gardeners, and that would be, wonderful. But I have everything I need in life. I've met the important goals of life. So just because I've had symptoms of mental health disorders doesn't mean you have a pathology. Most of the etiologies normal people experience are not persistent, nor do they lead to distress or loss of functioning over a long period of time. It's not a pattern. So be comforted, you probably do not have a psychopathology. And if you do, you're in college. You're doing really well. Somebody's taking care of you and you're handling your issues well. So don't worry about your pathology. Continue to do what you're doing. You're doing well. But most of us, no, we don't have a pathology. So a clinical diagnosis is the process of matching an individual's specific symptoms to those that define a particular mental disorder. As we talked about the symptoms, the etiologies, we match those up in a book called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. It is in its 5th rendition right now, and it is called the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders. It is the most widely accepted classification system in the United States. There's another classification system for Europe, and for most of the world, they use this European model, but we use the American Medical Association model, or the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association. It's the APA. They were not called the APA. The American Psychological Association started first, and then the American Psychiatric Association started. And so calling it an APA, I have a problem with that. But they are part of the American Medical Association, and they own this. Psychiatrists own this. We, as psychologists, do not get to change it. Psychiatrists, medical doctors, get to change it. And in the 2013 release of the 5th version of it, they did make some changes to the categorizations and names of pathologies, like Asperger's syndrome is no longer called Asperger's syndrome. They decided to tie it into high-functioning autism. Now, high-functioning autism tells me nothing. There's hundreds of different symptoms associated with autism. Asperger's told me exactly what it was that that person had an issue with, connecting with other people, understanding emotional content. And it's just amazing that they just decided they don't like Asperger, the man, so they're going to take away the name from him and combine it with autism. So that's just the way it is. Some things will never change. So neurotic disorders or neurosis, before the DSM-4, these were terms used to describe a pattern of subjective distress or self-defeating behaviors that did not show signs of brain abnormalities. There's nothing wrong with the person's brain. There's just distress and self-defeating behaviors. And there's no gross irrational thinking that's associated with the psychotic group. So these are now known as conversion disorders. The psychotic disorders or psychosis involves a loss of contact with reality. These people have trouble telling you what day of the week it is, how to use money, who's in charge of the world. You know, they have pretty good imagination. And that actually is, there's artists that are psychotic that are just great artists because their imagination held. So a disorder involving profound disturbances in perception, rational thinking, and affect, which also means mood or emotion, affect, mood, or emotion. So when we talk about moods, we can talk about the mood disorders. Mood disorders are abnormal disturbances in emotions or mood, including bipolar and unipolar disorders. Mood disorders are also called affective disorders today. Bipolar disorder is a mental abnormality involving swings of mood from mania to depression. A very manic person, and through normal to depressed, and then back through normal to manic again. And they'll stay more times in depression than they do in mania. A person who's in mania a great deal can end up hurting themselves badly. They don't think straight in mania. So mania is a pathologically excessive elation or manic excitement. These people want to get across the street, so they just go across the street and they don't think about the cars that are coming and they can get killed from that, or go across the train tracks without looking, if there's a train coming. Just walk down the train tracks without thinking about what's coming behind you. I'm on the top roof of a building and I want to get to the other building. Well, I'll just jump over there then. They commit suicide without wanting to commit suicide. That's not what they wanted. They just don't think straight in mania. They want to buy things. They want to acquire things too. So they will top out their credit cards, wipe out their bank accounts, buying things that they have no need to buy because they're manic. And if they see a credit card lying on the table, they'll take that credit card to go buy something because it's a means of buying things. They don't think about the fact that they're stealing from somebody by using somebody else's credit card. That's not in their thought processes. It's in their manic state. In depression, we all know depression because we've all felt depressed at some point. But pathological depression is horrible. Pathological sadness or despair, it's diagnosed at an average age of 15 and at a rate 15% higher than it was 50 years ago. That's bipolar disorder. At an average rate of 15 and a rate 15% higher than it was 50 years ago. Now, unipolar means just staying in manic or just staying in depression. Most of the time, we're talking about people who are very depressed and stay in depression more than they're normal, and they never go to the other side, manic. It is the commonest of all diagnosed mental disorders. It is not the most common mental disorder. It is the one that is the most diagnosed, because anxiety occurs more than depression does. But when somebody's anxious, we can deal with it sort of. But when a person's depressed, let's go see somebody. Let's go talk to somebody. So we diagnose depression more than we diagnose anxiety. It costs $43 billion in the United States alone. That is not medical care alone that we're talking about. That's the loss of work that's associated with a depressed person. 1 in every 50 succeeds in committing suicide. Now, we will see that in most cases, these issues occur more in women. And women do attempt suicide more than men do, but men commit successfully suicide more often because they take a much more active approach to it. I've had a friend who tried to commit suicide. She took pills, and then she called her best friend, and her best friend, because she was her BFF, called the hospital and got an ambulance out there to save her life. But when you pull the trigger on a gun, you're finished. And I have 2 cousins who have killed themselves with a gun, shotgun, and a regular gun. So depression, people who are depressed will try to commit suicide. Now, this is the reason why suicide, euthanasia, the end of life death, is not allowed in the United States. Because why would you want to commit suicide? The doctor just told me that I'm going to die in 6 months. Well, just kill me. Why? Because you're depressed. And depression can be fixed. If you're not depressed, would you really want to commit suicide? Now, if you're at the very end of life, in the last 6 months, at the end of the 6 months, and you have there's nothing to your life. You're laying in bed, you're in pain, they're trying to keep you from pain. Well, then I think you should be allowed, and there are some states that do allow euthanasia in those cases, with 2 doctors who have agreed that it is not depression, that it is something that you have no life left, and so it is okay to then end the life. It is 10 to 20 times greater than it was 50 years ago. Teenagers are more prone to acquiring this unipolar depression. It is more often found in women than in men, and we're going to find that in almost all of these except for the worst case mental health. That happens in men more than it does in women. But women tend also to dwell on causes of depression. They'll call up their friend and go, I'm depressed. Come over and talk to me. And so the friend goes over and they talk about it, and the woman gets more and more depressed as she's talking about her depression. But then she comes out of the depression because she's talking through the depression with somebody. Two heads are better than one. We'll talk about that in the therapy section. So men, can you imagine a man? I don't feel good. Come over and talk to me. No, we don't do that. Men go, let's go out hunting. Let's go out fishing. Let's do something to distract myself from this feeling that I have. And remember from positive psychology, that does work, but on a square curve, at the end of the time you're fishing or hunting, you go right back into your depression again, and because you haven't fixed the problem. And that's mood disorders. I'm going to stop here. I'm 1 minute over. So if there are any questions, please let me know. Kylie, I see that you're here. Kylie and Katie are here. I think that was the only two left that I didn't see before. But if you're finished and you don't have any questions, I'm finished. So I will see you on Friday. Have a very good Wednesday afternoon and Thursday. Stay healthy.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.